I'm so excited for this session. My name is Janna Siller, and I am the farm director here at Adamah, which is at Isabella Freedman in Falls Village. And we have an exciting session here where we have an overlap of folks, Hazon Seal Site folks here with the summit, and also some of our participants from Adamah at Home. So Adamah, the program that I work with here at Isabella Freedman, is a part of Hazon, and we run a farm and we run all kinds of different programs that gather people around soil, food, farming, community, land-based Judaism. And right now, since it isn't safe to gather for residential fellowship programs, we have this program called Adamah at Home, where folks from, it's really actually become an incredible opportunity where folks from all over the country who wouldn't otherwise be able to join us in person are able to be here with us on screens and gather for the type of learning and connection that we do here at Adamah at Isabella Freedman. So welcome to Adamah at Home participants, welcome to Seal Site participants. I'm gonna scoot through lots of stuff real quickly. We've got 50 minutes here for a big session. And I wanted to start us off with perhaps a surprising question. I am going to, let's see, I'm gonna go ahead and share my screen as people continue to trickle in. So you've each joined us today for a session on federal food and farm policy, right? That makes us think of the government, right? Policies are enacted by the government, and the government is a word, I think, that we can all safely say brings up a great deal of feeling, a wide diversity of feelings. And I want to, we haven't all met each other. We have hopefully our names available to us on the screen. And I'm going to ask you to do something a bit vulnerable, which is, if you're comfortable, sharing in the chat just one word or several words that come to mind when you knew today at 1 p.m. you were going to spend 50 minutes thinking about government policies. You were going to spend some time thinking about how those policies affect food and farming. So you were going to be thinking about the government, and any feelings, any kind of reaction that you have to that feeling, to the word policy. Could be you hear the word policy and you want to go to sleep. It could be you hear the word policy and you feel enraged or frustrated or creative or overwhelmed. And so, yeah, we're starting to get some. So just toss those in there. Lost, local action and national policy intention, interested but sense of hopelessness, change, education, interest and unsure. Finally, some intersectionality, confused, scared for the future, lots of rules to follow, bureaucracy is annoying, action and hope. Yeah, so many. Thank you so much, everyone, and continue if you've got some to throw them in there. I think I want to just really point out one important thing about that list, which is that there's just such a diversity of things that come up for us. And so we're gonna kind of see those and notice those and know those and sit with them and know that we have confusion and that we have uncertainty and we have a sense of knowledge of dysfunction and all of that. And at the same time, we are brave, courageous souls who are gonna sit here for 50 minutes and we are going to dive into it. And really, the reason we're going to do that is because a strong belief that I have is that right now there is so much drama in the news. It's just a constant scene of drama. And actually, the details, which are a lot less dramatic and sort of don't quite feed to quite as many of our neural pathways that sort of light up for different bits of drama, those are actually where a lot is happening and where we can actually impact and be a part of the story. And there's a lot of the drama and the distraction we actually can't really be a part of, that we're not invited in. There's no way, we can yell at our TV screens, or we can kind of sit quietly in despair, or we can get excited about individuals. And it's not really something that we can participate in. And what the Hazon Seal asks us to do really is to make changes within our communities, from our communities, for the world, out from our communities. And so the details is really, that's really where we actually have agency and where we get to be a part of the story. So that's what I want to invite you all into today. And we are going to be speaking about federal food and farm policy. And the beauty of the internet is that we are all together here today from all over the country, perhaps all over the world. And from each of those places, we also have local policies where we have so much room for impact. And we don't have, obviously, the ability to talk through each of those here today, but I guess I just want to acknowledge that there's a lot more too beyond the federal and national here in the US, but individual local impacts that we can make as well in your own communities. So we're going to dive in. I'm going to ask you another question for the chat. And what it is very, very vague. So you hear the word food, you hear the word farming, what words come to mind? Literally anything. It can be lemon, it can be chai tea, it can be compost, it can be manure, it can be just really anything that comes up. So we've got cows, agriculture, workers' rights, such an important part, aphids, little pests that get on our lettuce, medicine, plants, animals on the land, produce, pollution, compost, community, healthy soil, cycle of life, life and death, sustenance. So there's so much wrapped up in these two things, right? There's such broad categories, and there's so much, being in the rain, people in need, so much there. And I want to now take that list that we have here in our chat and hold it in our minds, things we take for granted, tractors, all of these. And now I want to ask the question, which of these do you think is affected by federal food and farm policy? The cycle of life, life and death, tractors, sustenance, yes, all of them. Can you make a living at farming? I would really say all of them. I would say everything we've listed here, healthy soil, pollution. I'm going back in our list and noticing produce, animals on the land, plants, medicine, aphids, even those little, if you've ever seen an aphid, it's gray, it looks like dust. And it looks like your plant is dusty when you have it, but it's actually little bugs. And I would argue that they really are all part of the story of federal food and farm policy. So each bit of it, what we eat for dinner, what we eat for breakfast, what we are growing, whether if we're growers, how we're making management decisions, how we're making the decisions of what to grow and how to do it, what inputs to use on our farms, how much does it cost? Can I pencil it out to sell a turnip at the farmer's market and pay for everything I needed to grow that turnip? And how big of a farm do I need to have in order to do that? And where do I need to sell it? And what price do I need? So it affects all of us. So knowing that and feeling excited about all the space for impact we have, I'm gonna dive into what we're gonna be talking about today. Again, I'm gonna be going through these incredibly quickly, and I would love for folks to throw questions into the chat, and I'm gonna do my best. Sometimes, talking and reading can be an interesting thing to do at the same time. So I'm gonna do my best to catch the questions that come into the chat. And if I don't get to your question, I'm sorry. And I recommend still throwing it in there because it may get other people's thoughts flowing, and it may even for yourself, just typing a question sometimes can be a good bookmark for yourself for something that you want to investigate further, something you want to look into. So I'll do my best with questions in the chat, but even if I don't get to yours, please don't be discouraged, and please just continue to throw those in there because I think that'll be a great part of the conversation. So we are going to go through a very quick bit of history. We're going to get a quick refresher on passing and implementing laws, and we're going to talk specifically about the 2018 Farm Bill and how policies like the Farm Bill can be vehicles for change. And then we're really going to talk about how to get involved, how you can be a part of this story. And in particular, in this moment, we're going to really dive into this very particular moment. So again, this is going to be a very brief history. This could be a master's degree, obviously, or much more than that, a lifetime of study. And we're going to do it in 6 or 7 minutes. But I want to give us a basis from which we're going to start. So let's see. Does anyone feel kind of quick that they could unmute and read us this first paragraph? Oh, you know what? You can't unmute. Only I can unmute you. You know what? It's a little too complicated. I'm just going to go ahead and read it. But thank you if you volunteered in your head. Thank you. I'm going to go ahead and read these two aspects that I would say are, and I'm not bringing them in to depress us or take us back into the most difficult parts of our history. I'm reading them because I think it's really important to start by understanding how a lot of our legal system with regard to food and farming evolved, right? So we evolved from a legal system that entrenched in its laws the idea or the project of stealing land, of resettling Native Americans through a series of broken treaties, massacres, and laws that facilitated the expansion of land theft by farmers from Europe. And then stolen labor. Slavery was entrenched in government policy from the Declaration of Independence through constitutional protections for enslavers and laws that denied rights to the enslaved people who worked the land. So it feels very important to start from here, because we're going to get into kind of how farming in the US has evolved and how policies really facilitate the types of farming that we have. So we go from there, right? What can we think of going backwards? We can think of this idea you may remember from middle school or high school of manifest destiny and people moving west, these ideas of laws that actually enticed people to settle big swaths of land and to till them up and now as we think about this and we think about climate change in this moment and we think about carbon release, every time we disturb that soil and move that organic matter through the soil and open it up, we're actually contributing to, right, the big release of carbon into the atmosphere. And so that was a big part of our laws, was sort of getting people, farmers out and giving them the tools they needed to farm in such a way that would open up land, more land, and bring forth the wealth from the land. In the 1930s, we had laws that really around agriculture that really took a shift. So for a long time, it was about how do we do more. And in the 1930s, we had the very first Farm Bill, which is a big piece of legislation that affects food and farms. So we'll talk a little more about what's in the modern Farm Bill. But in the 1930s, there was this idea, hold on, we gotta stabilize prices, and we actually have to control supply and demand a little bit more. It makes me think of the role of the Egyptian government when we think of the story of Jacob, and we think about of Joseph, and we think about right, this kind of idea that civilization involves governments that control grain stores to prevent famine, to prevent times of lack, and to try to keep things stable using times of plenty. So that was sort of the goal of the first Farm Bills. In the 1970s, there was this a shift sort of back to that message of the more you can grow, the higher yield, the better. And the reason for that is because international trade became, all of a sudden, opened up new markets that the US could again grow to, continue, okay, keep tilling up the land, keep trying to produce more, because we don't have this limit on where it can be sold. It's sort of, our markets are infinite. So there was a big push, again, kind of just this in what ways has the government stepped in to what people are growing and how much and how. And then for the past 30 years, I would say there's just this dynamic. If you catch anything from this history, it would be that there's this real dynamic within the Farm Bill of two different interests, and the farm bloc is one of those interests, and that means representatives from big farm states, big agriculture, known to be, heavily influenced by corporations that sell agricultural inputs like GMO seed and chemicals and that kind of thing, and representatives from states that are particularly concerned with food aid for their residents, with programs that make sure that people are well fed. So there's been a lot in that one piece of legislation, the Farm Bill, that addresses those two issues. And over the past 30 years, there's been a great deal of compromise between those two issues so that we can get legislation passed. Okay, was that quick enough for you? The entire history, US history of farm policy. A lot more to investigate there, obviously, but we'll jump into getting a sense, I think, to kind of back things up of how a bill becomes a law. Now, I'm going to kind of, I think it's very common, or the more that I've taught this material, it's very, very common that people feel embarrassed that they don't totally remember from school how this process all happens. And I think it can be very empowering to go back to some of the details and some of the basics. And you should know that if you're in that camp, you are not alone, not even a little bit alone, because every time I've taught this, folks have shared that with me. So we have some need around remembering how these things work. Okay. So we have two chambers of our Congress. The way that our US government works is that we have a House and we have a Senate. Each state votes together on two senators. So this is coming up, right? This is really very, very, very relevant in this moment to know that your state may or may not have an election coming up for your senator. Your senator may or may not be on the ballot this fall. They're on cycles, so different states are coming up at different times, and then there's the House. And so the House has more representatives because each of us has one representative for our district, which is a smaller chunk of our state. So for my state here in Northwest Connecticut, it's Litchfield County, and it's about our county, but different states are carved up in different ways for your House rep. So we have these two chambers, and the two chambers each come up with legislation on their own. They're communicating with each other as they do, but they're coming up with separate legislation. And you can see in this chart, the House has, the bill is introduced, the subcommittee kind of hammers it out. Then it goes to a larger committee. Then it goes to a rules committee. So there's all this committee process to kind of hammer out the language of the bill. And then it gets voted on by the full House. And then the Senate does the same thing. And then if the bill passes in each of those chambers, then there's a conference committee to decide exactly what the language is going to be for the one that they'll all vote on. So an example of this that's current that you may be hearing a lot about is the HEROES Act, where it has the House version passed and the Senate version has not. So for that example, we got to this green step. That's as far as we've gotten with that one. If the Senate passed their version of the HEROES Act, then we would be at the stage where they all are, or you know what? I may have said that slightly wrong. Anyway, we're somewhere between the green and the orange, the long orange one with that one. So we have to get all the way through, right? We have to, for a piece of legislation to become a law, we have to get the full House and the full Senate voting on it. It gets combined in the conference committee. Then they each vote on that combined version, and then the president signs it and it becomes a law. So that's how that works. We're going to skip this slide for the most part, but the gist of it is to remember that the Constitution's in charge. And then we have 3 branches of government. We have the legislative branch, which we just dove into, we just discussed. That's the one that comes up with the laws. They send laws to the president to be signed or not. And the judicial branch's job is to make sure that the laws follow the Constitution. So so laws can be brought to the judges at different levels to decide whether or not they are legal. So, and then you'll see under executive branch that we have all these different departments. And of course we have a cabinet, the secretaries are each in charge of their own department. The Department of Agriculture is the one that we're concerned with in particular here. So that's why I wanted to introduce you to this framework and make sure we kind of have this gist that each department is underneath the executive branch. And they're the ones that implement the laws. They're the departments are the ones that take the laws that were written by Congress, signed by the president, and they implement them, and they make the rules, and they allocate a lot of the funds and that kind of thing. Let's skip that. Okay, overview of the U.S. government in 5 minutes. Hope everyone's still with me. All right, so let's dive into the 2018 Farm Bill, which was the most recent one. And so I do hope that folks will use the chat. Feel free to just toss your questions in, or if there's something you've learned about this that you're excited about, just toss it in there. And I'm gonna, again, go through this pretty quickly, and then we'll dive in from this kind of body of knowledge that we've gained into how you can use this information in your own community and how you can use it as a tool for advocacy. So, what is the Farm Bill? I mentioned that it's this big piece of legislation. It's a collection of laws that govern most of the agriculture and food programs in the US. So it was first passed in 1933, and then it's authorized every 5 or so years. And the omnibus nature of the bill brings together many groups that wouldn't otherwise collaborate. So there are very different spending priorities within the Farm Bill. Here are the Farm Bill titles, meaning the different pieces of the bill. So the big pieces of it, though, that you should know about, one is nutrition, and that is the SNAP program. So that's the biggest piece of the Farm Bill, is actually the program that is this country's hunger safety net, that makes sure that we don't have famine, that we don't have mass starvation. Really, it is the safety net that means that even if someone's income doesn't allow them to buy food at the prices that food costs, that they will have access to food. So that is the biggest piece of the bill, and that is an entitlement program, meaning that the amount of money allocated for it depends on how many people apply for it. So if you fit the requirements for SNAP, then you receive SNAP benefits, as opposed to there's a set amount of money, and once it runs out, you don't get any. So that's the way that entitlement piece works. And then the other big piece of the Farm Bill, there's lots of other little important parts, but the other big chunk of money is payments to farmers to make sure that they can stay in business, whether the weather is, depending what the weather is, and depending on what prices are in markets. Something very important to know about these payments is that they really fit perfectly for large commodity growers, so growers of corn and soy, people who are doing large acreage. They are not good fits for a farm like mine, which is here at Adamah. We grow over 100 different varieties of food on a small scale, and we are not receiving those types of payments. However, there is a lot in the Farm Bill that does support small farms. And so that's the big important piece that I want to get to here, which is that advocates for the 2018 Farm Bill, Hazon included, were really trying to push for these details. And the devil is in the details, and the angel is in the details, right? There are programs in the 2018 Farm Bill which was passed, I don't know if anyone can even remember 2018, but it, like now, was not a particularly politically peaceful time. It was a time of a great deal of disagreement and a great deal of strife. And at the same time, some really, really important wins were made for small scale, sustainable, regenerative agriculture and for healthy food in our communities. And frankly, for the climate. And in particular, I would call a lot of these seeds in that they make a big difference. These programs that I'm about to discuss, they make a big difference. And their greatest potential is that they're there. They're written in legal language. We have laws that actually encase these in the protection of having been passed, having been put out there, and they can be grown from here. So a great deal of what's been happening in the House of Representatives right now, a lot of laws have been being passed lately in the House of Representatives, and then not being taken up in the Senate. And I would call those seeds as well, right? We have a lot to work with that we can hopefully grow as representatives see fit. So back to the specifics in the 2018 Farm Bill that we advocated for. Really, these programs that increase farmers' capacity to sell directly to customers and to upgrade their food safety compliance. So those are kind of big concepts that basically mean that small businesses are viable. We're seeing now during COVID that there has been an incredible resiliency to the local food movement. So small farmers who are selling directly to customers have actually been able to fill a lot of gaps in sales that large companies weren't able to fill during the lockdown. So during the lockdown, we saw all kinds of situations happening with food that continue to be issues, where milk is being dumped out because the vast majority of dairy that is produced in this country goes to make mozzarella cheese. Actually, I shouldn't say the majority, a quarter, it's a surprising amount, a quarter of the dairy that is produced in the US ends up being made into mozzarella shredded cheese, big, and put into big giant bags, because that's how much pizza we eat around here. So all of that dairy had nowhere to go during a time when restaurants were mandated to be closed, and farmers were dumping milk, as opposed to smaller producers who are more nimble and are selling directly to customers rather than, in that kind of industrial way. We're able to continue reaching customers, whereas the big producers couldn't quite pivot quickly enough to switch to packaging butter in individual packets, or packaging sour cream in tubs as opposed to giant sacks or whatever gets used at Taco Bell. And so that investment here in the 2018 Farm Bill, and that advocates would like to see grow, is not only helpful for farmers and that type of farming, but it's very important to kind of the nimbleness and flexibility of our system and our ability to eat. So we've also got other programs in there helping beginning farmers, young farmers. That there's a real issue in the country of the increasing age of farmers. You wouldn't know it by looking around at Adamah. We've got lots of young farmers around here, but overall that is a national issue that we have. So supporting beginning farmers, supporting conservation and soil health. So soil conservation and pollinator conservation. We receive at Adamah, incentives through this program, Conservation Stewardship Program. The Gusnet Program, I think, is an incredible concept, offering prescriptions to help SNAP recipients purchase fresh food. So meaning that if someone receives SNAP, receives food stamps, they can actually, their dollar can go farther by purchasing fresh food directly from farmers, right? So then we're solving two problems at the same time. We're solving the problem that people of any income level need access to fresh, healthy food, and the fact that farmers really need a good price in order to continue their businesses. And then here's an example of something very small that I think is important. The heirs property issue really is around, and this gets again, so we're looking at these changes in the 2018 Farm Bill, and we're looking back through American history and thinking, where does our food system come from? What is it based on? And we know that one of the things that it's based on is a system of slavery, and we know that African Americans in this country are much less likely on average to own land. And we can look back through history and understand why that is. And African Americans who do own land in the US tend to own it in this legal category called heirs property. Heirs property means that you don't have a deed to the land, but rather have inherited it over time. And this relates to access to literacy. It relates to all kinds of issues throughout US history. But in the 2018 Farm Bill, everyone was really focused on kind of big issues, and advocates really snuck this in there, snuck this idea that heirs property owners can now apply for USDA grant programs, meaning they can get those payments that we talked about in our last slide. Whereas in the past, they didn't have access to those. So that's really a racial justice issue. Again, kind of boring, in the details, in the weeds, not the dramatic scene from the news feed, kind of one of those nitty-gritty things, but it's the kind of thing that if an advocate just chooses, okay, this is the thing, this is what I'm gonna learn about, and this is what I'm gonna talk about, and then wins can happen through those. So let's see, Lauren is asking, what does LAMP mean? Money to farmers, how do you get the funding through grants, USDA? Great question. So it's the, I'm forgetting what the acronym stands for. Local something, I don't remember what the acronym stands for, but they're very different programs. If farmers are looking for funding, my biggest recommendation would be to check in with their National Resource Conservation Service agent, the NRCS agent, which is a part of the USDA. And that agent can help them navigate these different programs. Basically, a lot of there are a bunch of programs within LAMP, but they're grants to farmers to, for example, maybe their wash station is kind of a muddy mess. This used to be true for us, and we, just a very small amount of money allowed us to put in gravel, to grade it, so that water wouldn't build up, and to increase the safety of the food that we're processing. So that kind of grant. Grants for farmers markets, so to be able to fund a manager of the farmers market who actually helps farmers organize and access markets, so that kind of thing. But again, there's a lot wrapped up in there. It's often called technical assistance. Thank you, Sam. Local agriculture market program. And Cindy has seen these issues that I've mentioned. So yeah, so a lot there in the 2018 Farm Bill that was really good. And let's see. I'm gonna review quickly just that then once a bill is passed, it gets implemented, and that also there's a lot of room for advocacy around the implementation. There are opportunities to comment on regulations. So if you go to regulations.gov, and if you team up with, this will be something that I'll recommend as we go forward, I'll recommend more in depth, but if you team up with an advocacy organization that can tell you, okay, here it's the moment, to comment on this kind of esoteric, boring sounding thing, law that's being implemented, and they receive and most people don't pay attention to that kind of thing. And then the government receives a flood of comments saying, we want this law to be implemented in a way that is climate friendly. That can make a big difference. So there are a lot of opportunities within the implementation of the law, in addition to just the passing of the law. And then I'm going to skip that. And then there's an appropriations process. So funding gets allocated to different programs in different ways. And I'm going to skip this to jump in to kind of where we are right now with food and farming in relation to our very, very current moment. So to back up just a tiny bit, I just told you how a bill becomes a law and that it then needs to be implemented and that money needs to be appropriated for it to be fulfilled. None of that is working super smoothly right now, as you may have heard rumor of, not in the area of food and farming and not in any area of lawmaking. Right now, the wheels are rusty and things are not moving smoothly. Very few laws are actually being passed because lawmakers are not able to compromise and get them passed. And then the appropriations process that we mentioned is not working. Hence the consistent threat of government shutdown, and then the last minute. This has been happening for years now. No one can come up with a budget that everyone agrees with, and so the government is about to shut down, or it does shut down, and at the last moment, they pass something called a continuing resolution. You may have heard of, or CR, that gets passed. And in that process, things kind of continue to get funded. So for example, we are able to continue to access funding that was legislated through the Farm Bill here at Adamah, and that is largely because of these continuing resolutions that Congress passes, because programs are able to continue even though the funding doesn't get worked out in detail, and increases in funding don't happen, and needed changes to regulations don't happen, and that kind of thing in a continuing resolution. But the government does continue to function when the CRs pass. So that's where we are generally. And then we had a new, as though we didn't have enough going on, a new factor of COVID and the lockdowns that ensued, and of course how that affected the food and farm industry was profound overall. And so, like I mentioned before, the local farmers have been relatively nimble, although we have also been strongly affected by the sort of, right, we had the economy moved in a very particular way. People ate in a particular way. There was some predictability to how people ate. And then all of a sudden, people started eating in completely different ways. People started needing their food in, if you think about just yourself and how your eating may have changed since the beginning of COVID, the entire food system has had to pivot to meet that. And so in the initial COVID relief legislation, which was called the CARES Act, there were several programs that were part of that were meant to help farmers and eaters around food. So one of those programs was the Coronavirus Food Assistance Program, which gave direct payments to farmers affected by the change in market, and also most of those payments have been given out to, again, these large-scale farmers, farmers who are growing commodities, farmers who are growing with conventional practices. There was no attachment to that. There was no prioritization or trying to incentivize people to use conservation practices, which is a common thing that advocates for climate-friendly agriculture, or climate-smart agriculture as it's known. We really want those funds to always be tied to incentives to farm in a climate smart way shouldn't be able to receive that funding and pollute. But that was not a win in this particular instance. And then there's this Farmers to Families Food Box program, which you may have seen in your own community. Again, the government purchasing food from large-scale farmers for emergency food relief distribution. And of course, most of us have heard of the Paycheck Protection Program being funding that helped employers, including farmers, make payroll and stay on top of bills. Now, you also may have heard that continued funding has not been forthcoming. So we have not gotten to the HEROES Act has not passed. We've not gotten that legislation through. And the president has just in the past couple of days been really flip-flopping on, he stopped all talks, said no more negotiations can happen. And today I think he's back to hoping to, so it's real, this COVID relief is all tied up in the drama of the moment. But it is very unlikely that there will be continued relief until after the election. So what do we do as communities? How do we get involved? I just gave you a ton of information. I hope a semi-digestible amount. And what can you do in your own synagogue, in your own group of friends, as an individual yourself at home? So there are so many ways to get involved that in fact it can often be daunting. I like this quote that a friend of mine said, there's so much in this world to tackle, it can be overwhelming. And in response to that feeling, we can feel ourselves turning away, abdicating responsibility and hope. Please stay in this, don't leave. Even small things make a difference. Today I did this thing, tomorrow I will do another. I hope you do too, because you are powerful. And I actually think that what I've given over so far today is evidence for me of this exact reality, because I've seen, again, if we go back to that slide where I talked about the seeds of positive change in the Farm Bill, in the 2018 Farm Bill, even among all the disagreement and all of the challenges happening in the government right now, there were major changes that really impact the climate smart aspect of agriculture and really impact individual eaters, individual farmers. And so as we each bite off one tiny, 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 tiny piece and choose which thing we are going to do, it makes a difference. One phone call each week makes a huge difference. One letter written every 2 weeks makes a huge difference. And so that's what we can get involved in. So how do you do that? You can certainly vote, which we'll get to in our next slide a little bit. We have action alerts through Hazon. We like to try to, we have an aspect of our blog that will give you in particular moments, we'll say, okay, now's the moment to call your senator about heirs' property rights in the Farm Bill. Tell your representative in the House that you want to see an increase in funding for conservation payments, and that will really help to reduce erosion in your county. It's very particular, it's very specific, it's very boring. I'm not going to sugarcoat it for you. It's very, very boring, but it's important, and it makes a big difference. Those types of calls to your representatives. Redistricting, reform, and voting rights. Voting rights, I can't say enough for, and that'll be on the next slide, but I think that makes a huge difference in all of these issues. And then organizations like the National Sustainable Agriculture Coalition, if you're still wide awake after all of this and you're totally juiced and you're like, this is fascinating, I want to learn a lot more about food and farm policy, my number one recommendation would be the National Sustainable Agriculture Coalition. You can Google them, and they just have a wealth of information, and they have action alerts that really can help your community make these types of kind of weigh in on these issues. So that would be, if you want to get involved in that, that'd be a great great place to start, National Sustainable Agriculture Coalition. And then, of course, as eaters, we can all make informed choices. We can choose when we're buying, when we're choosing what we're going to serve at Kiddush, when we're choosing what we're going to comprise our own diets of. We can choose to support farmers that are taking action around these pieces. So I said all that, and we were in October of 2020, meaning that we have an election coming up in less than a month now. And there's a lot we can do. So of course we can each vote, and voting makes a huge difference. So iwillvote.com, if you haven't double checked your registration status and all the details of what you need in order to get your ballot. If you want to vote absentee, they have all the details there. And in addition to checking your own details and making sure that you're prepared and have a good solid plan to vote, you can help 10 of your friends get a solid plan to vote. So they say that having a plan, knowing exactly when you're going to vote, are you going to vote by mail? Are you going to vote in person? If you're going to vote in person, what time are you going to vote at? How are you going to get to the polls? Fleshing out each of those details actually vastly increases the likelihood that that you'll end up casting your ballot. So not only can you make a plan to vote, but you can encourage 10 friends to vote, especially young folks. You know, young folks are just dramatically underrepresented in voting. And so if you have young friends and you're not sure they remember how to buy a stamp, or you know, we're not so used to using the postal system anymore, or you're, you know, you think they could use any help just fleshing it out, brainstorming, just reach out to 10 friends, make sure that they vote. Vote Forward. You can write letters with Vote Forward. Dayenu has its Chutzpah 2020 campaign. Is a campaign to call voters. It's a nonpartisan process for phone banking and text banking, and they're calling voters who are interested or committed to solving and addressing climate change, and encouraging them to make sure that they have a plan to vote. I've volunteered with their phone banking and text banking, and they're super well organized, and it's actually really fun. You join with other folks. So for seal sites, that could be an event that you organize, a good way to connect with your own community, to organize an event among your shul, among your JCC, where folks get on Zoom together and go through that process. And they're doing it every Tuesday and Thursday through the election. You can certainly work at the polls. We have a reality that historically and currently, so many of our poll workers, people who are working at the polls, are elderly. And we know that young people are less vulnerable to the virus, and so that could be a role that somebody plays, is really to volunteer to work at the polls, and that's very, very needed right now. So volunteering to monitor for voter suppression on election day with Protect the Vote is a great one. When We All Vote campaign is another nonpartisan campaign that's really working to just increase voter turnout. If you have resources, you can donate to organizations like Fair Fight, which is working on ending voter suppression. Of course, that's a big issue in the upcoming election. Common Cause is also working to end voter suppression. And then this list here, and these are all links, and of course you can't see them, so thank you, Ellie, for including the links, but if you want to just write down their names and Google them, you'll find them. Americans of Conscience has daily actions to support free elections, so those could be a good way too. So I really appreciate everyone's attention. Thank you for listening through this all of these details and all of this quick talking. And I hope that that you're inspired rather than overwhelmed, and that you feel like you have some resources to gather your community and just get involved, whether it's in this election cycle or after. Thank you so much for listening to the details, and I'm inspired by how many of you were here and working on educating yourselves and getting to the next phase in food and farm policy. Thanks, everyone. Have a great day.